How you doing, Mr. DJ? We're soon count down my fancy playlist of April 23rd, 1990. I am absolutely amazed of just how alternative leaning this fancy playlist is. This is a regular top 40 list, but it is quite eclectic. And at number 17, a song that would have never made it on the pop charts here in America or in England, but number 17 on my fancy playlist. If you're a Jesus and Mary Chain fan, you got to be proud of me for putting this record at number 17. Head On, the name of the song from Automatic. It was their third album. Jesus and Mary Chain had a heavy guitar driven sound, particularly on their first album or two. Their first album, Psycho Candy? Psycho Candy was critically acclaimed, and the single off of that first single, Never Understand, went to number 47 in England. You got to think about this about Jesus and Mary Chain. They were not really commercial enough for top 40, not necessarily to be played alongside Don Henley, Michael Jackson, or Janet Jackson, but they were a cool alternative band to get into. MTV showed them a little bit of love, playing them on 120 Minutes. Remember 120 Minutes? 2 hours of straight alternative music. If you were an alternative fan or new wave fan back in the late 80s, early 90s, 120 Minutes, that was your place right there. A lot of people found a haven in 120 minutes. The misfits who are outside the top 40 realm, who wanted something more than just Eric Carmen or Madonna. So here we are, Jesus and Mary Chain, built around two guys basically. It was William and Jim Reed, and they formed around 1983. They added a couple of members, but basically it was them. The core of the group was Jim and William Reed. Started sending out demos in 1983, and you won't believe what their dad did for them. Well, first off, when they were sending out demos in 1983, they were using a device called Porta Studio. It was a four-track recorder. It had an compact audio cassette player or tape deck built into it. Remember those cassette players, those cassette audio, the cassettes, when you listen to music on cassettes? Boy, that was back in the day, for sure. Their dad got it for them. Porta Studio, he bought Porta Studio for these two guys, his sons, for £300. 1983, a considerable amount of money in 1983. Think about it. That's equivalent to around $500 or $600 in American dollars, roughly in that area. Man, and here's the big topper. Their dad had been laid off from a factory, either permanently or temporarily, and out of his redundancy pay, he bought the Porta Studio. I mean, that's showing some support right there. That's a sacrifice. £300 in 1983. First album was Psycho Candy, 1985. It got critically acclaimed. That heavy guitar sound, that wall of guitar, drenched. I can't really describe their music. I can't. You got the 60s psychedelic. I'm thinking of groups like Chocolate Watch Band in 1966 and 67. Let's Talk About Girls, when they had that heavy guitar feedback, that heavy guitar fuzz. Hear a little bit of that, certainly in Jesus and Mary Chain. First British single was Never Understand, went to number 47 in England on the pop charts. This was in 1985. But before that, they released an indie single, and I wrote down the name of the indie single, Upside Down. And it was on the British indie charts for about 76 weeks. 1984, 1985, boy, they were getting a lot of love from the critics. One critic from NME magazine, a distinguished British publication, called these guys one of the best British bands ever. Boy, they got a lot of love. They came out with another album after that, but in Automatic, though, some of their critics got disillusioned with Jesus and Mary Chain because Jesus and Mary Chain, unlike a lot of the techno-British groups, they departed from the synthesizer. It was all guitars. If you're really into guitars and live drums, well, Jesus and Mary Chain, that was your thing right there. But on automatic, they used a drum machine for percussion, and instead of using a bass player, they used a synthesizer. And some of their critics had issues with that. But boy, they had some hits off the album, though. Not top 40 hits. Blues from a Gun, remember that? That was on my fancy playlist in early 1990. I was jamming out. As a matter of fact, if I remember correctly, Blues from a Gun was in rotation, medium rotation, I think, on MTV. And then Head On. Head On did well for them here in the States. It went to either #1 or #2 on the Modern Rock Tracks chart here in the States. They should have just called it alternative. It's such a tongue twister, Modern Rock Tracks. And of course, the song Head On is number 17 on my fancy playlist. And despite the use of drum machines, this is still very much a guitar, heavy on guitars. I don't think they really departed that much from the guitar sound that was their signature. Jesus and Mary Chain, their influences. Oh God, I forgot to mention something. There was so much. My notes have jackknifed all over this piece of paper. Chaos, complete and total chaos. Jesus and Mary Chain were influenced by a variety of people. Stooges, Ramones, Monkees, Shangri-Las. At one point, they wanted to sound like the Shangri-Las. Now, how lovely is that? As a matter of fact, they borrowed something from one of the girl group hits on the beginning of Just Like Honey, which I believe was off of Psycho Candy. Just Like Honey, the beginning drums on that record, very similar to Be My Baby by the Ronettes. And the drums to that Ronettes record, Be My Baby, played by the legendary, God, the guy played on loads of records back in the 60s, early 70s. I think he even played some drums on Love Will Keep Us Together by Captain and Tennille. In the mid-70s, Hal Blaine played drums on Be My Baby by the Ronettes. Hal Blaine, the prime drummer of the Wrecking Crew, called Constellation. Call it a constellation, a stellar constellation of West Coast, Los Angeles based studio musicians. And Jesus and Mary Chain, they copied it. They copied that drum pattern on Just Like Honey, the beginning of Just Like Honey, and they nailed it. They just flat nailed it. I'm sure if Hal Blaine heard that, he'd say, kudos. All right, number 17. Is there anything else I need to add to this? It reminds me a little bit too of REM. Remember Radio Free Europe? That song had a wall of guitar in there. Mexican Radio by Wall of Fudo in '83. You can hear some of that influence there in Jesus and Mary Chain. Well, let's go ahead and get into it right now. Jesus and Mary Chain at number 17, Head On. Fantasy playlist of April 23rd, 1990.